What if you and your fellow inmates could pull off the biggest prison break in British history and strike a blow to your enemies? Would you take the risk, or would you stay put and accept your fate? This is the story of the Maze prison escape, a daring and audacious plan that involved 38 prisoners, smuggled weapons, fake uniforms, and a hijacked food truck. To understand the Maze prison escape, we need to go back to the historical and political context that led to its creation. The Maze prison, also known as Long Kesh or HMP Maze, was a high-security prison located near Lisburn, Northern Ireland. It was built in 1971 as a response to the escalating violence and unrest that plagued the region since the late 1960s. This violence and unrest was part of a complex and long-standing conflict known as the Troubles, which pitted two main groups against each other, the Unionists and the Nationalists. The Unionists, mostly Protestant, wanted Northern Ireland to remain part of the United Kingdom, while the Nationalists, mostly Catholic, wanted Northern Ireland to join the Republic of Ireland. Both sides had paramilitary organizations that used bombings, shootings, assassinations, and riots to achieve their goals. One of the most prominent and notorious paramilitary groups was the Irish Republican Army, or IRA, which fought for a united Ireland and opposed British rule. The IRA was responsible for many deadly attacks on British security forces, politicians, and civilians, both in Northern Ireland and in mainland Britain. The IRA also had a political wing called Sinn Féin, which advocated for the same cause through peaceful and democratic means. The British government tried to contain the violence and restore order in Northern Ireland by deploying thousands of troops, imposing curfews, and arresting suspected militants. Many of these arrests were made under the Special Powers Act, which allowed the authorities to detain people without trial for up to 6 months. These detainees were held in internment camps, such as Long Kesh, where they faced harsh conditions, abuse, and torture. The internment policy was widely criticized and condemned, both domestically and internationally, as a violation of human rights and a fuel for more violence. In 1972, the British government decided to end the internment policy and instead introduce a new system of imprisonment for convicted paramilitaries. This system was based on the principle of special category status, which recognized the political motives of the prisoners and granted them some privileges and concessions. These included the right to wear their own clothes, the right to abstain from prison work, the right to associate freely with other prisoners, and the right to receive extra visits and parcels. The prisoners who received special category status were housed in separate compounds, away from the ordinary criminals. These compounds consisted of prefabricated huts surrounded by fences and watchtowers. Each compound had its own kitchen, recreation room, and exercise yard. The prisoners were allowed to organize their own education, entertainment, and discipline with minimal interference from the prison staff. In 1976, the British government announced that it would phase out the special category status and treat all paramilitary prisoners as ordinary criminals. This meant that they would have to wear prison uniforms, do prison work, follow prison rules, and lose their privileges and concessions. This announcement sparked a fierce and bitter resistance from the prisoners, who saw it as an attempt to criminalize and dehumanize them and to undermine their cause. The resistance took the form of a series of protests that became known as the Blanket Protest, the Dirty Protest, and the Hunger Strikes. The Blanket Protest started in 1976, when a prisoner named Kieran Nugent refused to wear the prison uniform and instead wrapped himself in a blanket. He was soon joined by hundreds of other prisoners who also refused to wear the uniform and only wore blankets or towels. The Dirty Protest started in 1978, when the prison authorities refused to let the blanket protesters use the toilets or the washrooms unless they wore the uniform. The prisoners responded by smearing their own excrement on the walls of their cells and throwing their urine out of the windows. They also refused to cut their hair or shave their beards and lived in filthy and unsanitary conditions. The hunger strike started in 1980, when the Blanket and Dirty protesters decided to escalate their protest and demand the restoration of their special category status. They went on a hunger strike, refusing to eat any food and only drinking water. The first hunger strike lasted for 53 days and involved 7 prisoners who were eventually persuaded to end their strike after a promise of concessions from the British government. However, the promise was not fulfilled, and the prisoners felt betrayed and angry. The second hunger strike started in 1981 and involved 22 prisoners who were led by Bobby Sands, a prominent IRA member and the leader of the blanket protest. The second hunger strike was different from the first one in that the prisoners went on strike one by one at staggered intervals to maximize the public attention and pressure on the British government. The hunger strike also coincided with the general election in the United Kingdom, in which Bobby Sands ran as a candidate for the Fermanagh and South Tyrone constituency and won a seat in the British Parliament with the support of Sinn Féin and other nationalist parties. The hunger strike became a major political and humanitarian crisis that drew international attention and sympathy and polarized the public opinion in Northern Ireland and beyond. The British government, led by Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, refused to negotiate or compromise with the hunger strikers and maintained that they were criminals, not political prisoners. The hunger strike lasted for 217 days and resulted in the deaths of 10 prisoners, including Bobby Sands, who died on May 5, 1981, after 66 days without food. The hunger strike ended on October 3, 1981, after the families of the remaining strikers intervened and authorized medical intervention. The prison authorities tried to implement some reforms and improvements, such as allowing the prisoners to wear their own clothes and improving the sanitary and medical facilities. However, these reforms were not enough to satisfy the prisoners, who still demanded the full restoration of their special category status and the recognition of their political status.